Welcome back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. It is a big time in my life. We're in a little downtime here, moving out to the county, coming back to the city. We're going to get the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by our friends at the Maryland Lottery. Back out on the road, probably at Nacho Mama's, where I had some delicious salsa the other night. So big thanks to them. And also to our friends at Costas and Fadley's and over at State Fair in Beaumont. We're going to get back out once we can get a little more unmasked like Kiss. And this is a time of the year where the Ravens aren't existing. We're watching football. Used to be a time where it would be hot stovey. We would be a few weeks away from going to Fort Lauderdale or Sarasota if you're really old, Miami, with the Orioles of Earl Weaver, and then through all these years. And instead, I don't know, man. My body clocks, my like circadian rhythms are off from all of this COVID thing from 2 years ago. I do know it's cold out and it's snowing, so it must be winter. But I was thinking some baseball, and over the weekend, the Orioles made news. I'll tell you what, I don't know if it's good or bad, and I'm talking to everybody I can talk to about this because I'm really reserving judgment on this whole, is it a good idea or not a good idea that they remove all these seats out in left field. So I'm going everywhere. Local people, baseball nerds, people who love the sport, people who are commissioners of the West Coast League. Rob Neyer joins us now from the West Coast. Some would say the best coast. He's out in Oregon, out in the Portland area where I once bent an elbow and had some delicious Asian food, and looking forward to getting back at it. I had Maury on a couple of weeks ago from Forbes as well, Maury Brown, Bizball. You're a writer of writings. You've covered the game. You're statistically oriented before the world went that way in analytics. Moving fences in and around. Not the first time this has been thought of, is it, Rob Neyer?
No, and I'm glad that's your first question, because the way my brain works, I tend to put things into, or try to put things into, historical perspective. And moving fences, trying to give yourself an advantage by doing that goes back a century or more. So this is nothing new. What has happened over the course, especially the last 15, 20 years, is that all the stadiums have become more uniform. There was a time when not many, but a few teams would have an extreme hitter's ballpark or an extreme pitcher's ballpark. And that was just part of that team's identity.
Well, that was part of our childhood. I mean, you and I are very, very similar. I'm an Oriole. Memorial Stadium played pretty true. It was a pretty true ballpark in that way. But Kansas City was a triples machine. All of the AstroTurf, all the cookie cutters, St. Louis, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, with those, the football, baseball stadiums, they were all the same. But the Astrodome was enormous, right? I mean, everything was a fly out there, right? So nobody could hit home runs. Julio Cruz hit 14 home runs, lead the team. This is the history of the game, is that there is variety in these ballparks, and it's made for great nerd debates. It founded this radio station in 1992. We didn't have any Ravens here. We had baseball and things like Camden Yards coming online and what it represented. And every dimension was, sacrosanct and also open for debate from everybody from George Will to, if Yogi Berra came in, he'd compare it to the Polo Grounds or something, right?
Right. And it's funny because I remember when Oriole Park first opened, people said it was an extreme hitters park, great for home runs. But when you went and looked at the numbers, it really wasn't that great for home runs. It was an okay home run ballpark. It seemed like it was a great home run park because left field was relatively close, and you'd see people hit the balls over the right field, onto the concourse beyond right field. But
also heat and humidity play a huge role. And Rob is a little bit of a historian of all things Baltimore Camden Yards here. John Stedman wrote very, very passionately for many, many years as all this was debated once we lost the Colts and we were in that process of building Camden Yards. And I was working at the paper then. So I was doing the Agate page and the scoreboard page of the Evening Sun. And there was just a huge civic debate about where the stadium would be. As you can well imagine, Port Covington, which is now where the Weller Company is building like a city on the south end of where the tunnel is. And the Camden Yards warehouse was debated because it was thought to be something that would restrict wind, right? And especially on summer nights, 98-degree, nasty, sweaty, stinky nights. Those are the nights you get 13 home runs at Camden Yards, historically.
Well, and every time a new ballpark is built, and this goes way, way back, there are theories about how the weather's going to affect it, or this building over here. The thing, you never know how a park is going to play until it's actually built, because there are so many factors. I'm sure now they have some sophisticated modeling systems that allow teams to really dig in, but even then, you just don't know. The thing about Camden Yards is that it has become more of a hitter's park relative to the rest of baseball over the last 10 or 15 years, as what were pitchers' parks sort of come back down, and vice versa. Basically, all the stadiums that were extreme have gone the other direction because players complained, and teams had a difficult time figuring out how to build to their stadium. But, I think about Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium, right? Which opened in, I think, 1923 and lasted for almost 50 years. Was one of the most extreme ballparks in history, right? You remember at least hearing references to Death Valley. Actually, they called it Death Valley even in the newer version, not the current version, but the second version. But in the old days, it was like 480 feet to left center field in the old Yankee Stadium. And yet somehow the Yankees figured out a way to win there.
Well,
right?
That stadium was always weird because it always had all that extra space beyond the fences that you knew at various points they had tinkered with. It became the Monument Park and all of that. Right. And then there's foul territory, which in places like Oakland or in Yankee Stadium, where there's just anything you would pop up behind the catcher unless he ran 300 feet back where he was going to catch, right? And I don't know who that was built for, or why it was that way, or why it was so narrow behind home plate at the old Yankee Stadium. But all of these stadia started to work with, let's get the fans closer to the stadium. Here in Baltimore, one of the big bitches last week was about people that had those seats that are now like part of left field, right? And you think about the history of Camden Yards all of these years. If you take all of that grass, it will now be grass, all those seats, and make it grass and put the wall. And think about how many Chris Hoyle's home runs would have fallen 20 feet short, and how many flyouts there would have been. And it feels to me like they're trying to be punitive to Aaron Judge or recruiting to pitchers. But I find all that to be gaslighting. I find that to be a ruse. I think they're trying to do this to be competitive now, because I don't think Mike Elias is going to be here 15 years from now to worry about what it does to the stadium design. I think this is about, maybe we think this helps us in the next 3 to 5 years, right? This is a gimmick in some ways after 30 years to do this.
Well, what I think that there's something to that. I think you look at your pitchers and they're giving up more home runs than you're hitting, and you think, well, we need to move the fences. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is your pitchers aren't as good as the other team's pitchers, right? It's kind of obvious. And that's always been the issue when teams have complained that they gave up too many home runs. And I can cite chapter and verse from the Kansas City A's back in the 1960s. Who kept complaining they gave up too many home runs. Well, it's because your pitchers aren't as good as the Yankees pitchers, etc. Now, having said that, what's different about this era, I think, is that players have more financial power. They also have a lot more places where they can complain when they don't like how things are going. Joe DiMaggio didn't go to the media and complain when he hit a 420-foot home run that was an automatic out in Death Valley at the old Yankee Stadium. It just wasn't done, right? Sure, you might complain. Occasionally, there might be a story where Joe DiMaggio said, I would have hit 45 home runs last year if we had a normal stadium. But for the most part, players didn't complain about those sorts of things. But now you go back, 15, 20 years, when Ryan Klesko signed with the Padres and hit all these fly balls that didn't make it into the seats, he was expected to hit home runs. And when he didn't, his excuse was, well, it's impossible to hit home runs here. Look out there. Look how far it is. And that's been played over and over again in San Diego.
Well, it was built for Tony Gwynn to hit doubles and triples, because the Padres weren't going to sign power hitters. And they thought more along the lines of, our pitchers, if they make mistakes, they become 8s and 9s. instead of H's and R's, right?
Well, that's right. And there was for a long time this, it was a cliche in baseball that pitching is 75% of baseball, right? You remember hearing that. You don't hear it so much anymore, and it's not actually true, but we used to hear it all the time. And the corollary is, we'll be better if our pitchers have better stats. Well, yeah, and if your hitters have better stats. But again, it was typical when you built a new ballpark that you would make it easier for the pitchers. That was considered the smarter play. And that's gone away. All those stadiums, San Diego, Detroit, others that were built specifically as pitchers' parks, they've been changed to be more neutral. And that's where we are. That's where the sport is now. Basically, if this park isn't fair, whatever that means, then we've done something wrong and we need to fix it. And that's what we're finally seeing now with the Orioles.
Rob Neyer is the writer of writings. We're going to get to his umpire book and other things, and we're talking about the game and moving fences in and out. Rob, I was a little flippant. I know you find that hard to believe on social media over the weekend because people are talking about this here. Like, they don't talk about much with the Orioles around here other than losing and, when's Rutschman getting here, and obviously with the lockout at this point. It kind of is what it is. I mean, they don't have their names on their team websites at this point. So anything that stimulates a good baseball conversation that I have far too few of, in recent years, that I do enjoy just for the sake of arguing or debating or whatever it is. I didn't even know where I stood on this because it was so sort of out of the blue. It's so sort of, the old man's dying, can't make any decisions, but now John's deciding this. They're passing it on to the taxpayers. They're trying to get more things done. They're in this 1.5 year fake lease that they don't have a real lease on. They're awful. You know what I mean? The sport is shut down. It's all of this. But it's also the first weekend the Ravens haven't played in 18 weeks or 21 weeks if you go back to preseason. And we're sitting here watching all of our oppressors lose, Steelers, Eagles, Patriots, all out, right? Cowboys, don't like them either. And so amidst all of this on my timeline, it's all of this debate about where the bullpen's going to be. And a couple of fans got screwed because they had tickets that they read on the internet. Oh, you took my seats. Like, what? My seats are now a 7. It's a fly out. For me, I'm really trying to debate the long play of this, being the guy who's been doing this for 31 years, but also trying to analytically go through the last 30 years, not just on the Chris Hoile's home runs, but thinking like, all right, if the fence were this way, how would it have changed all aspects of this? And someone said, well, they'll be able to get pitchers now. And I'm like, they never not got a pitcher because of the ballpark. They did not keep Messina because he was a jerk and needed to go sign with the Yankees and was a fly ball pitcher, was running from the 364 pole in left center field because he pitched there for a decade. It was about the owner really being awful and really being an awful person and a POS, and the organization being shoddy and just poorly run and all of that. But more than that, it really came down to money. They were never going to pay at any point were they in the market to pay, pick an era, Clemens, Pedro, Schilling, all those, Randy Johnson, those guys all changed teams, and they all would have pitched at Camden Yards. They all would have taken the ball for top dollar at that point. The Glavins and the Smoltzes and those Maddox, those guys never really made it out of there. But when I think of the last 30 years, the problem ain't the ballpark, and it's not fly ball pitchers or ground ball pitchers or dimensions or whether they should have loaded up with a whole team full of Juan Gonzalez's that just pop fly balls over that fence all day, the way I guess the Red Sox have tried doing that with various points with the wall. But it's really about money, and it's really about ownership. And I'm afraid of the AL East until I sign with the Yankees or the Red Sox. Then I'm not afraid of it anymore. Then I'm not pitching in there, right? So over the course of the last 30 years, I think if the wall had been made true or fair or whatever, how would it have affected the team? It certainly wouldn't have made more pitchers come here because of the ballpark. Pitchers came here because those kinds of pitchers come based on money and can I win? And in both cases, for long, long stretches of this Angelos time after Gillick left, let's say, after the first 5 years, They haven't been willing to pay anybody. So if you want to build the ballpark for pitching, the one thing you need to know is you got to pay your pitchers to stay, no matter what the dimensions are.
No, that's absolutely right. It's long been said that it's difficult to attract pitchers to hitters' ballparks or hitters to pitchers' ballparks. But you nailed it. All that really matters with almost every free agent player or future free agent player is how much are you going to pay me, right? The Yankees don't have any problem attracting right-handed pitchers to Yankee Stadium, even though it's a great place for left-handed hitters and maybe not so great for right-handed pitchers. If you pay them, they will come. It's always been that way. It always will be that way. A couple of
the
arguments
Rockies prove that, by the way, too.
Oh, yeah.
My friend Denny Nagel.
Mike Hampton and Denny Nagel, of course.
Denny Nagel, I've known since we were kids together. We're dear friends. The extra $12 million that he got for signing in Colorado and his ERA being hurt, now that it's all over with, I mean, he won and won in a couple places. Look, man, it was about money. It wasn't about, am I going to get my feelings hurt in Colorado? He might have been a little cocky. So like you said with Hampton. But then you got to go out there and pitch and talk about a place they should have built the ballpark bigger, right? Like always, I'm like, what were you guys thinking? If you want to attract pitchers and not have to pay them $10 million too much to come out there and be a popcorn machine, move the fence back 18 feet, dude.
Well, the problem with Coors Field is even if you move the fences back, what you do in that case is you create more space between the outfielders. You create a massive amount of space. In fact, they already have that.
So then you hire Todd Helton to hit doubles and triples.
Or you need 3 guys in the outfield who are really fast. You know what I mean? And that's, you can only play that game. You can only game the ballpark so much. Take one thing away, you add something else. But one thing about not having an extreme ballpark, and this is where I can sort of see what the Orioles are getting at, is that, well, 2 things. One, it's been said, Bill James wrote about this decades ago. I don't know if anyone ever quantified it, but that it's more difficult for young pitchers to learn their trade in an extreme ballpark. Maybe true, maybe not. I don't know. One thing I do know is true is that today, more and more hitters, as you know, are optimizing their swings to hit home runs, right? That's the game now. It's line drives, yes, but line drives.
You don't want to be a ground ball hitter.
Right. Those guys don't really exist anymore.
Yeah.
So if you have a significant number of hitters who are changing what they do to hit long fly balls, you probably don't want a ballpark that rewards them for doing that. Especially if their pitchers are optimizing against that. I do think that probably in today's game, it makes sense to have the fences be back further than they were, say, 20 or 30 years ago when you had so many hitters who weren't actually trying to hit home runs. But now with everybody doing it, or almost everybody, maybe it just doesn't make sense to have that sort of ballpark anymore. Now, the counter argument is we'll just take advantage of it with our hitters. You mentioned Adley Rushman. This is a guy who could hit a lot of home runs someday. Ideally 25, 30, 35 home runs a season. Not going to be as easy to do that.
Well, they've definitely taken home runs away from their own players. I mean, that,
right.
That's true.
Right.
And whether it's more or less is just something to talk about. I mean, to me, like to your point, 10 years from now, it'll play out that the ballpark changed in a certain way, but that won't even be normalized because if they have better ball players, every part of it will be better. Because they're not losing 108 games every year.
But if you have a ballpark that's basically neutral, the one thing that you do is you basically you've eliminated all the complaints from one side, from the hitters or the pitchers, whatever sort of ballpark you have. And I think that's what this has come down to many times. Yes, the Orioles can point to analytics. When the Tigers moved their fences in 8 or 10 or 12 years ago, whenever that was, did they point to analytics? No, they basically just said, we're tired of listening to our hitters complain about the fences. And I think that's really what it comes down to most of the time, is getting tired of players complaining. That might be, I think some of that's happening here with the Orioles too. I do believe them when they say that what their analytics say, because these are some pretty smart guys who know the numbers. I get that. but I also think they get sick of hearing people complain about it.
Rob Neyer's here. He writes about things and is a true baseball historian, also the commissioner of the West Coast League. And so you're doing something with umpires, and I just want to say this first thing first. My name's Nestor, and not just Aparicio on the Luis side, but when your name's Nestor and you're 8 years old in Baltimore, those guys running around with the red jackets, Nestor Shylock, who actually was a friend of my church and actually came to our sports night. I have his autograph from when I was like, so umpires. I'll be honest with you, Rob. I had a media credential from 1986 when I started at the Evening Sun until Angelos took it from me in 2006. That 21 seasons where I have had a press pass, and I always, I wandered around. I was in clubhouses. I know baseball players. I've always been around them, coaches. I was telling old Sparky Anderson stories earlier about sitting in his office down in Lakeland, Florida back in the 90s and sitting there eating barbecue. And I don't know that I've ever really known umpires, like Steve Palermo and what happened there. I was once on a shuttle ride. It was actually after the Robbie Alomar home run. I rode the shuttle back to the airport with an umpire in that game. Alomar had spit on the umpire, the Hirschbeck thing. And I don't remember the umpire's name. I'm telling you, my life of 30 some odd years of doing this, I have never really conversed with umpires. And they're a little above the game. Same thing with referees. I've been on some airplanes where I knew those were the officials in the game, but I don't know an NFL referee. All the guys you see making the calls, I've never had a press conference with them, been in a room with them. They've never sat down. I know Mike Pereira. I know the guy. I know Dean Blandino. I know those guys when they're done because they get work in media and I see them and meet them. But umpires, man, they haven't been a part of even calling games and different, being a part of the media and whatever. I've never had a conversation for real with an umpire or really known an umpire. That's bad on me, right? That's kind of embarrassing when you consider hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people I've met in baseball.
Well, I think a lot of them like it that way. They occupy this strange space where they are. It's often said that they're doing their job well when you don't notice them, right? But every once in a while, every so often, you can't help noticing them because they suddenly are in the middle of a huge
I said Hirschbeck, right? Because when you know their name because they blow a call in the 85 World Series or they screw up a perfect game at the end or get a call wrong or that, or they get the Jeffrey Mayer game, they make that kind of a call or whatever. Right. I mean, we sit here and bitch about football officiating. It's like a full-time job in this country, right? Because people are betting on it. But with baseball, it is crazy that I've never really thought about this because a couple umpires have written books and maybe they've been on the show or whatever here and again, but it really is amazing, these men who do this job, right? And they've been on strike, right? They've had their own battles and everybody hates them, right? Fans hate them, managers hate, right? They have no friends in terms of flying from city to city as a crew. Everywhere they go, it's like a WWE match, right? And they're the bad guy.
Well, I think a lot of that, aside from the balls and strikes, a lot of that has actually gone away because of video review, right? It's difficult to think of a terribly blown call in baseball in the last, say, 8 or 10 years. There are still a few things that are completely umpire's judgment, and of course we'll argue about that. For example, an infield fly call. That's still the umpires. There's no video review. There's no replay for an infield fly call. And of course, we had the famous one. I don't know how many years ago it was now. I guess it's probably 8 or 10 years in the Braves playoff game, which I still will maintain was the correct call. Half the fans of that from that game will say it was horribly blown. But we don't really notice the umpires nearly as much anymore because a lot of the calls that would have been blown, that's a pejorative, obviously, would have been probably missed. Now they're corrected.
Well, it's hard to blow calls now to some degree. In the NFL, right. It's the things that can't be reviewed, like pass interference, where you're like, oh my God, he was there a second and a half early. You didn't get my call right. Or that lowering the head thing that it seems like they can never figure that out. Again, man, I'm not watching a lot of baseball, Rob. My team stinks, right? I tried putting it on in October. I didn't call you and bitch about it, but I had a back problem in October. I was really on my keister right during the period of time where they're playing 4 or 5 games a day, in the beginning. And I tried to get into the flow, and I kept quoting Barry Manilow, up, down, trying to get that feeling again. And when you don't recognize the players, you don't recognize the game, you don't recognize starting pitching, you don't recognize the shift, like all the way through, man, the ship can sail. And as a kid who collected baseball cards all my life, it is a little weird. And you try to get back into it, and you're trying to sort of meander your way back into what's the new normal. How is the game played now? How will it play out for Grayson Rodriguez and Adley Rutschman when I come back? And how do you win in the modern era? How do you win now? And all of these analytics have really taken over the game. And there's no doubt that that's why they moved it. They have some measurement that says this is going to help them to some degree, right?
Right. Oh, absolutely. I'm sure that they have an analytical rationale for doing it.
And umpires not a part of that, right? Balls and strikes, when they get screwed on the balls and strikes, the stadium has no part of that at all, other than you give somebody an extra pitch and they hit it in the upper deck.
Right. But the umpire stuff, it's fascinating to me how that has changed. You mentioned Nestor Shylock. He was a little before my time, just in the sense that I wasn't really paying that close attention when he was still umpiring to those guys. But boy, every single umpire from the 1980s is still in my head someplace. If I hear that name, it's like, oh yeah, he umpired X number of Royals games, I'm sure. And that's kind of gone away now. They're not famous for the most part.
Joe Brinkman, second base. I go through all the. If I start giving the names from the 1970s and 80s at Memorial
Don
Stadium,
Dinkinger. Don Dinkinger will always be famous, and that basically has gone away. The umpires now are better. They are younger. They don't work as many games, so we don't hear their names as often. They don't make as many controversial calls because so many of them get reversed if they're incorrect. So they are not famous like they used to be. You mentioned that they wrote books. Well, I'm doing this book with Dale Scott's coming out in the spring. There was a time when all the famous umpires wrote books, and that rarely happens anymore. The only reason Dale Scott's doing a book is because he has a very unique personal story. He's the only out umpire in Major League history. Dale came out in 2015 or 2016, right toward the end of his career, which was ended not because of that, but because he suffered a concussion and had to shut it down. But umpires just they're not famous anymore as they were. And that's probably a good thing for the game, I suppose, because it means basically more calls are being made correctly. But I do miss a little bit, the Ron Lucianos of the world who gave you one more reason to maybe watch the game.
Well, if anybody wants to go see, Earl Weaver argue with Durwood Merle, or, any of the great YouTube video clips of, when I was a little boy, man, I would say to my dad, what's Earl saying out there? I wonder what he's saying out there. And, 35 years later, he's put it on the internet. That, by the way, Rob Neyer is here. He is one of my dear friends in the baseball story. Whenever life gets really low and it gets really heavy and I'm moving this week and things are bad, my wife and I can usually turn to some Don Rickles or some Johnny Carson or whatever. There is never a time where we Google the Earl Weaver bit at first base where Murray's got the glove up on his face laughing, and Flanagan's trying to talk him out of the tree. I mean, if you're not laughing at the profanity there, you've not worked in the classics. I mean, so part of these, that was part of, and I'd say this too, having watched games in Cuba and Venezuela, there is part of this sort of peacocking that goes on in other cultures with the umpire. That's almost like a Sky Lolo bit with the wrestling referee, that it's almost in on the shtick, that you argue with the umpires argue back, they're demonstrative, you rip up the rule book, kick the dirt, Lou Piniella, all of that histrionics, that's all gone, all it's kind of, but it involved the umpire, fighting with the umpire was part of the art of all. If you go back and watch any of the highlights of all the bloopers, all the Mel Allen This Week in Baseball, there was a part of that fighting with the umpire was the way you won fan appeal, right?
Absolutely. And actually, Dale Scott was on the field for a few of Pinella's greatest meltdowns and writes at some length about that in the book. And it's incredibly entertaining. And I do think we've lost a little color from the game in various ways over the years. The players are more skilled than they've ever been, but we also have a much better idea. It's much more predictable than it used to be. And that gets back to the stadiums too, right? There used to be this massive range of ballpark design. And part of that was because the ballparks in the old days were often built because they had to fit within a very prescribed area because of where the streets or the neighborhood around it.
Well, the San Francisco ballpark would be the last example of that, right? I mean, it was built to sort of conform, and it's kind of weirdly built on that pier. That's right. Turned into McCovey Cove, right?
That's right. And that's, for the most part now, when they build the new ballparks, they just have a massive piece of land. Usually it's a parking lot next to the old ballpark, and they can do whatever they want. And what they want to do is essentially create something that the fans can say, yes, this is our stadium. It looks different than the other stadiums from the outside. You look at the stadium in Minneapolis, for example, and that stone you see, that's native stone on the outside. That looks like a thing that belongs in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. But once you get into the inside of most of these stadiums, the dimensions are going to be basically the same. And that's what, it's not difficult to predict. The guy hits a fly ball 350 feet down the left field line, it's going to be a home run, no matter where you are. And that hasn't always been the case.
Rob Neyer's here doing a little history baseball with us. And, I did 30 ballparks in 30 days. The one I'm still missing now is Atlanta because they've since opened that one. And now they're the champions and all that stuff. Where are you on the labor thing? I mean, we could sit here and talk about how awful the Orioles are and how far away they are and where the left field bleachers are or are not and whatnot. But getting onto the field and getting this labor thing, I had Tim Wendell on a couple of weeks ago talking about John Hellier and Lords of the Realm. And, I'm 53. I'm getting old. I didn't shave for you, Rob. I mean, I dressed up my Coons Ford shirt, but I'm not shaving. I'm getting old and tired for all this. And this is the same argument we were having 30 years ago before the Ravens were even here, back in 93, 94, 95, and that ugly period of time. We're certainly into that again. This is a full-on war. It's just, same entities, just different. It's not Marvin Miller or Don Fear this time around. It's just still different.
No, that's right. Most of the same dynamics are in place that have always been there. The names are different, but going back to the early 80s, you can go later if you want, go to the mid 90s. It's still about the owners wanting to keep as much of the revenue as they can, the players, and especially the veterans who run the union, wanting to get as much of that revenue as they can. And I'm not saying that they're exactly the same, and that as a fan, you should choose one side or the other, or you shouldn't. But most of the dynamics are the same. One thing that is different is that the actual amount of money, the revenues, have skyrocketed in the last 30 years. I don't have the figures at hand, but it used to be that baseball's revenues, $2 billion might be would be a really good figure for all of the Major League Baseball revenue wise. And now it's 8 or 9 or 10 billion. So there's plenty. I've been saying for many years that baseball is a wash in revenue. The question is who's going to get it. Now the players share, the percentage of that revenue that's going to the players has dropped significantly. There are various reasons for that. The players don't care what those reasons are. They just see that figure going from 54% or whatever it was 10 years ago down to 43%. I'm just making these numbers up, but they're not that far off.
Well, baseball's taking on a lot more people on the media side because they put people like me out of business by creating their own media in business, which means they have to pay more people inside the industry. It's become its own. One of the reasons it's grown so much is because they've taken the media inside. And as you know, as your revenues, rise, so do your expenses. So that's kind of
true.
Where they are.
At the same time, one of the things that MLB does is they created this Major League Baseball Advanced Media, which runs their website and has created all these other things. And they created MLBAM, as people call it, outside of Major League Baseball as a separate entity, and they've made billions from that.
And they put it out there to keep it away from the players. Very, very strategic.
Exactly. They don't count that as Major League Baseball revenues. So the players are saying, wait, that all came from the same place, and it's the same owners. And another thing that
and
has
if we
changed,
stop playing, you stop earning.
That's right. That's true.
Yeah.
The players have a lot of leverage for that reason. Now, MLBAM has been used to create other non-baseball revenue streams too, by selling technology they invented. So it is way more complicated than it was 30 years ago. No question. The owners are way richer than they used to be. Now every owner is a billionaire, right? That didn't used to be the case.
Charlie Finley was not a billionaire. He
was not, as many other owners weren't. Edward Bennett Williams was not a billionaire.
Right.
These were just well-heeled people, some of whom actually ran the teams as their primary business. It isn't like that.
Or to lose money every year to make it up whenever they sold it and get a tax break, because making $200,000 or losing $200,000 to a beer distributor in 1965, it's a tax play. At that point, still is a tremendous tax play. But, Peter bought the thing for $173 million, really $145 because it came with $28 million in cash because Camden Yards was rich. And, his kids are going to sell it for over $2 billion, right? I mean, that's that in addition to whatever money you put in your pocket along life's highway. It's an incredible business.
You can't lose.
The players know that.
That's right. You can't, whether it's NBA, MLB, NFL, you can't, MLS, you can't lose. Once you get the team, it's, at least as we've seen over the last few decades, it's guaranteed to appreciate far beyond anything you could do with your money.
Well, and in the case of the Angelos, is if you want a new garden and you want to, move around the second floor, you get the state to pay for it. So that's, that's where we are right now. Is where the conversation began at left field. He's not in left field. He's usually way in play. He is Rob Neyer. You can find him out on Twitter. Talk about the book and all that with Dale Scott. When's that happening?
May 2nd, I believe, is the official publication date. So very soon.
Well, look, man, I love having you on the program talking about old school stuff. And anytime baseball percolates around here, and it's not often enough, I like to reach out to you. So I hope I get out to the West Coast for some more rock and roll. We get these masks off. I never appreciated life before the plague till we had a plague, right, Rob?
Yes. I think this is, I wouldn't say that everyone should live through something like this, but it is true that for our generation, who weren't drafted and sent to war, who didn't have to suffer through a depression, we had it pretty good, most of us, right? Just in terms of having to get through something on a national level. And this is sort of the closest that we've come to having to deal with something that in a communal way. Unfortunately, the country hasn't really responded in such a communal way, but I do feel like I had it pretty good for 53 years, and then this kind of went sideways.
And then there's the whole fascism thing we'll take on in the next segment. So we can certainly. Hey, bobbleheads. I get behind. Is that a Steve Austin, or is that like Howard Cosell all the way up there on the right? I'm looking up there in the blue. It looks a little like Cosell from here, and I'm like, man.
You're close with Steve Austin. That's actually, I'm glad that you and I are the same generation, basically. Yes. That is Oscar Goldman. Do you remember Oscar Goldman?
Who's Oscar Goldman?
He was Steve Austin's boss.
Oh, so it's from the Steve Austin collection? It is from the $6 Million Man collection.
Yes, it is. I don't know how you knew that.
Because I'm a nerd like you, Neyer. Come on, man.
Yes, that is Steve Austin. Also,
is that a Whitey Ford Heartland up there? What is that thing in the green box?
That is a Whitey Ford, not an original Heartland. He didn't have an original back in the 60s. That is one from the 90s. Heartland came out with new statues, and yes, that's a Whitey Ford.
I have two originals. I have three originals. I have Warren Spahn, I have a Yogi Berra, and I have a mint Luis Aparicio that a guy felt like I should have.
I have two of those myself. I have Spahn and Aparicio, and Nellie Fox, and Mickey Mantle, and Eddie Matthews.
Well, they came with those weird toe plates, right? Like Yogi had a mask
Yep.
So Yogi's knees are a little beaten up on mine because he kind of was bow-legged because you needed to have a stand to stand him up a little bit. And if you didn't stand him up, he fell over.
Yep.
And then their noses got banged up a little bit. Like my Warren Spahn was a little, because, Spahn was always coming back. So, but Louis in a box and he's perfect. And I don't know what the hell to do with him. He barely stands up and I'm a little weird. He's going to fall over, but I don't know, man. Memorabilia, if you're not putting it out, and I'm moving again this week. So this is like fourth move of my adulthood. I've been writing for 40 years. I'm an old newspaper guy. I have all this rock and roll. The memorabilia, it's time to go. I've been auctioning. I've been moving. I've been like afraid that like things are going to disintegrate or burn up. So I've been in weird mode getting rid of my Tony Gwynn bats and stuff like that. And when it sells, all I can hear is Tony saying, "Put the money in your pocket, man. Don't worry. It's just a bat, man. I gave it to you. I'm glad you could get rid of it. You know what I mean? I'm glad you enjoyed it, So like I had stuff and now I'm just sort of like, it was in boxes and I'm 53 and I don't know what to do with it. So, and I'm green screening. So even like widgets that I have, like my Cuba poster over here, don't show anymore. I don't know, man. I'm in a weird place, like on ownership of things. Like, cause my George Brett bobblehead, my Marsha Brady bob. What do you do with these things? My Rush bobbleheads. What do you do with them?
Right. I mean, my bobblehead collection is probably 20 or 25. And
what's the prize possession? What's the one if right now wife says they all got to go, you keep one? What's the one you keep? And is it the most valuable or is the one that means something?
I don't think any of them are valuable, except I do have a Vikings bobblehead from the late 60s that, just because it's old, probably is worth the most. I brought 4 out last week because it was National Bobblehead Day a week or two ago. I'd have
Jackie Robinson on the right.
Jackie on the right. He's around somewhere. Where's Jackie?
No, I see a statuette. I'm trying to figure out who the player is based on.
Oh, that's Willie Mays. I have a Clemente and Mays right there.
All right, yeah.
So the bobbleheads, for me, the ones that I treasure are the ones that have some sentimental value, and I will tell you why they have sentimental value. Bill James is up there.
I love that.
I worked for Bill for 4 years, as you probably remember.
That's how you got smart.
The one next to him is Hank, who was the Milwaukee Brewers actual mascot dog for a few years. They found Hank outside their spring training complex about 8 years ago. He was all dirty and he had matted fur, and they brought him in, they cleaned him up, and the team adopted him basically. And shortly after they did that, I went to their stadium and interviewed him and got these great pictures with him, and he's giving me a kiss. So then
did you interview Bernie Brewer too, or no? Was he unavailable?
No, just Hank the dog. Jerry Mathers, the Beaver.
The Beef, nice.
I got to meet Jerry at a Portland Beavers game and actually interview him on the radio. So I have a real sentiment. And then the other one is there's a Bill Murray.
Were you hard on the Beaver?
No, I was not hard on. I was very kind to the Beaver.
Just making sure. Okay, fair enough.
And then I have a Bill Murray bobblehead down there. I did a piece about Bill Murray's professional baseball career a few years ago that just gave me a great joy. So I got the Bill Murray bobblehead. So those 4 I would keep. I'd have a tough time keeping one.
I got some Bill Murray stories for you, because so when the Orioles, this is a good 30-year Oriole Park at Camden Yards story. In '92, when the team came here, Sutcliffe famously pitched the first game, April 6, 1992. Sutcliffe, from his Chicago exploits, was friends with Bill, like good friends. Like Bill and Murray, much as like 30 years later, has this reputation. And I have crossed paths with Bill several times in my life. But in '92 and '93, before the strike, Sutcliffe was on the team, and Bill Murray would just show up. And I'm being serious when I say this. This is like, he's Bill Murray. He's like famous, and like even in 1992, probably more famous then, right? Walking the street before the internet made everybody famous, right? We didn't have reality stars, then we had real stars. And I would literally be one of the first guys in the clubhouse, because I left the clubhouse to walk to my studio at 5 Light Street. So I would get down to the clubhouse at like 2:30. It wasn't even like officially open. And this is before they became dicks and shut clubhouses and didn't let you in till 4 o'clock. It was very open, and they knew who I was, and I'm Louis' cousin, and I had long hair. I still have long hair. And you would just go in there, and wait for Brady Anderson to show up, or Chris Hoyles, or Ben McDonald, or whoever. Those were the guys on the team, right? Bill Murray would sometimes just be sitting at Sutcliffe's locker and just be waiting for him to get there. And sometimes he'd be in there for like an hour and a half. He became like one of the guys. Ripken knows, like, and when he found out that I was Louie's cousin and he's a Chicago guy, we became friendly, and it was fun. And he did a bumper for me, like in the Stripes voice for me. He read a bumper. And many, many years later, well, during that era, the 93 All-Star game was here. And that was very famously the Michael Jordan. That's when he decided to go be a baseball player. He was wearing the White Sox outfit. Bill Murray was here that day, and so was Patrick Ewing, and there was Meatloaf. There was a whole bunch of Tom Selleck. It was Camden Yards, 1993. Every movie star in the world wanted to be here, right? And Kevin Costner was here, all of that. And they had the home run derby. Selleck hit a real home run, hit the porch. And Bill Murray had his Cubs gear on, and a Cubs Sandberg or somebody gave him a helmet to put on. So he's got his helmet, and he's Bill Murray, and he looks like a little bit like Bad News Bears, a little lemon, little buttermaker kind of thing going on. And or Mathau, I should say, not Lemon, Mathau, wrong actor. So Murray was there that day. All these years later, his son got the job as the Towson basketball assistant. And all these years later, Barack Obama is the president of the United States. Barack's wife's brother, Barack's brother-in-law, was the basketball coach at Washington State. And they would play games around the Capitol for the 8 years that Barack was running the country, safely, I might add. I got to dive into politics with you. We'll do politics next time. So Bill Murray's at this game because his kid's the assistant. And Barack shows up, sits on the court at Towson, and like Bill Murray's at the game and comes out of the stands down on, and people are like, Bill Murray flew in for the game. I'm like, no, his kid's the coach, man. Like, he's an assistant coach on the team. So Bill Murray's been this recurring sports figure, and like even in a place like Baltimore, I swear there must be 10 Bill Murrays, right? Does he still own baseball teams, Bill Murray?
He does. He does indeed.
He's a special guy, Bill Murray, man. Let me see that bobblehead. Is he wearing a baseball outfit?
Well, here he is. Yep. Yeah.
Oh, man.
That he through a series of events, he came to the Pacific Northwest in 1970, I believe it was 78, and spent a few weeks with the Grays Harbor Loggers in the Northwest League, and actually got 2 at-bats.
Was he filming a movie?
No, he was filming. I used to have it sitting here handy. Maybe I don't right now. He was filming 1 year. SNL did a 1-hour special called What We Did Last Summer. And they had 4 cast members, including Bill Murray, shoot a short film about what they had done over the previous summer. And Bill's short film was, I went and became a Grays Harbor Logger. But he actually did it. He actually played in 2 games.
Now is that the league that you are the commissioner of?
No, the Northwest League, the actual affiliated, which actually Northwest League doesn't exist. They just got rid of that a year ago, but it was an actual professional baseball league with affiliated teams. Although the Grays Harbor Loggers, this team was unaffiliated. They were an independent team.
And what's that worth on the internet? That's got to be a $200 bobblehead on the internet, right? Come on.
I don't think I paid that much for it. No, I think I paid 30 or 35 maybe.
That's nice. Well, that's a bargain. You got a bargain, Neyer.
But yeah, so I have a lot of anyway, it's a great bit. I don't think it's on the internet, believe it or not. I have an actual physical videotape. That's what I had to get. Speaking of eBay, but if you can track down, it's a lot of fun, and you get to see Bill Murray in uniform in old Olympic Stadium out on the coast of Washington. It's fantastic.
Man, you know what? I love having you on, telling old stories we don't know we're getting into. I see bobbleheads, and with every bobblehead, there's a story. And usually with everybody I've met, there's a story that comes along with it. Hey, I appreciate you. By the way, one of the lost picture that I lost the videotape of me riding in the Ravens Super Bowl parade for 19 years. It came back last year. So that was the thing that I had to get that I got. But there was a picture taken of me and Bill Murray on that day, taken by Jerry Wachter, was a longtime deceased, wonderful man. His son Scott was a longtime friend of mine. Took a picture of me and Bill Murray that it never I've never seen it. It's somewhere in the Angelos. The Angelos stole the collection later in Jerry's life, just like literally usurped it all and stole it after Jerry died, and the kids have to fight to get it. Awful. Just all, it was in the papers, all that. That picture, that slide is somewhere trapped at Camden Yards of me and Bill Murray in 1993, standing at home plate, just like this, like idiots. And I'll never see that picture. It sucks, but I know it happened though. And you have the bobblehead. So, hey, I got a picture of them later. It's just not, but it's not the same as him wearing this stupid Cubs helmet, looking like he just came out of Brewster's Millions or one of those movies. Hey, man, I appreciate you as always. Stay safe. I hope they play baseball for you. Your league going to play or no? Yes. Yes.
We're going to play full speed ahead. 5 teams in Canada, 11 in the U.S. We're playing.
You know, I invited Rob Manfred on. I invited Adam Silver on. I invited Commissioner Gordon from Batman on. I got a real commissioner on this week. Commissioner Rob, I appreciate you, man.
You bet. My pleasure.
Beers
Thanks,
on
buddy.
me next time, man. Rob Neyer's out in the Great Pacific Northwest. He's in Portland. He is a baseball historian, and I thought they're moving the fences around at Camden Yards. Let's go have some fun with Neyer. It feels like a cold winter day around here. We're going to get back out for crab cakes. I owe all these guests of mine, whenever they come to Baltimore, crab cakes. Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. We're going to let ourselves play, get these masks off, get back and get some proper salsa and a burrilla quesadilla with our friends at Nacho Mama's. I am Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We never stop talking Baltimore positive